King Solomon didn't just build temples. He built the most disturbing marriage empire in human history. 700 wives, 300 concubines, and a political machine fueled by women's bodies. This isn't a love story. This is calculated conquest disguised as matrimony. And the truth is far darker than you think. The Bible calls Solomon the wisest man who ever lived. But wisdom and morality, those are two very different things. And when you peel back the golden veneer of his legendary reign, you find something disturbing lurking beneath a sexual empire built on political manipulation, religious corruption, and the systematic commodification of women. Let's talk about the man who turned marriage into a weapon of mass expansion. 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 3. The Bible doesn't hide it. 700 wives of royal birth, 300 concubines. That's 1,000 women, not metaphorical. Not exaggerated for dramatic effect. 1,000 women. To put that in perspective, Solomon would have needed to spend time with a different woman every single night for nearly 3 years, just to see each one once. This wasn't romance. This wasn't even lust in the traditional sense. This was empire management through organized sexual control. But here's where it gets truly sinister. These weren't marriages born from affection or even desire. They were diplomatic transactions. Every wife was a treaty, every concubine, a political pawn. Solomon's bedroom was quite literally his war room, and women were the casualties. Ancient Near Eastern politics ran on a simple principle. You don't just conquer a kingdom, you marry into it. And Solomon perfected this strategy to a horrifying degree. When Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh, one of his first and most significant political marriages, it wasn't because he found her charming at a royal banquet. It was a binding contract with Egypt, the superpower of the ancient world. She came with a dowry that included the conquered city of Gezer, which Pharaoh had burned to the ground and presented to Solomon as a wedding gift. Imagine that. An entire city, raised and gifted like a piece of jewelry. But Egypt was just the beginning. Solomon married Moabite women to secure peace with Moab, Ammonite women to neutralize Ammon. The Edomite women were to control Edom. Sidonian women to access Phoenician trade routes and their legendary shipbuilding expertise. Each marriage was a calculated move on a geopolitical chessboard, and each woman was a piece sacrificed for Solomon's expanding influence. These women were torn from their homes, from their cultures, from everything they knew, shipped to Jerusalem, not as brides, but as hostages with crowns. And once they arrived, they were absorbed into a harem so massive that many of them likely never even spoke to Solomon beyond their wedding night, if that. Now, let's talk about what life actually looked like inside Solomon's harem, because this is where the horror becomes tangible. Historical records and archaeological evidence from similar ancient Near Eastern palaces paint a grim picture. Harems weren't romantic retreats, they were controlled environments, monitored by eunuchs, governed by strict hierarchies, and isolated from the outside world. Women in Solomon's harem would have been ranked. The 700 wives of royal birth held higher status than the 300 concubines, but even among the wives, there were tiers. Your value was determined by your father's kingdom, your ability to produce male heirs, and your usefulness in maintaining political alliances. Imagine the psychological warfare. 1,000 women competing for the attention of a single man who viewed them not as people, but as assets. The jealousy, the manipulation, the backroom plotting. Some women would have gone years, maybe their entire lives, without meaningful interaction with the king they were bound to. And children? Solomon's offspring aren't even properly documented. The Bible mentions Rehoboam, his successor, born to an Ammonite woman named Naamah. But with 1,000 women, There should have been dozens, if not hundreds, of children. Where are they? Either most of these marriages were never consummated, or the children were simply irrelevant to the biblical narrative collateral damage in the machinery of empire. If you're learning something disturbing today, hit that subscribe button for history's dark ledger, because we don't do sanitized history here. We dig into the stuff they don't teach you in school. And smash that like button if you're enjoying this deep dive into the shadows of the past. Here's the most twisted irony of Solomon's reign. While he was collecting wives like trophies, he was simultaneously building the holiest structure in Jewish history, the Temple of God. Picture this. The same hands that signed marriage contracts for political gain also laid the foundations of a temple dedicated to the one true God who explicitly commanded against such practices. Deuteronomy 17, verse 17. Couldn't be clearer. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. Solomon knew the law. He wrote thousands of proverbs about wisdom and righteousness. Yet every time he wed another foreign princess, he was actively defying divine command. The temple took 7 years to build. His own palace? 13 years. And his harem? That was a lifelong construction project that never stopped expanding. So while Jerusalem's priests offered sacrifices for the nation's sins inside Solomon's golden temple, the king himself was living in deliberate, continuous violation of God's law just yards away. The builder of God's house had turned his own household into a monument to excess, political ambition, and sexual exploitation. Sacred and profane, existing side by side. That was Solomon's Jerusalem. But here's the twist that even the Bible can't ignore. Solomon's empire of wives destroyed him. 1 Kings 11 doesn't sugarcoat it. His wives turned his heart after other gods. Solomon, the man who built the temple of Yahweh, the holiest site in ancient Judaism, started worshiping foreign deities to appease his foreign wives. He built high places for Chemosh, the god of Moab, for Molech, the Ammonite deity associated with child sacrifice, for Ashtoreth, the Sidonian goddess of fertility. Solomon erected altars to foreign gods on the hills surrounding Jerusalem, in direct violation of the covenant that made him king. This wasn't love. This was the inevitable consequence of treating human beings like political chess pieces. When you marry 1,000 women for empire, you don't just import their bodies, you import their gods, their cultures, their loyalties. And Solomon, in his arrogance, thought he could control it all. He couldn't. The Bible records that God was furious. The kingdom that Solomon built through sexual diplomacy, it would be torn apart. His son Rehoboam would rule only a fraction of it. The united monarchy of Israel would splinter into civil war within a generation of Solomon's death. All that wisdom, all that wealth, all those marriages, and in the end, it crumbled. Because you can't build a stable empire on the exploitation of 1,000 women and expect it to stand. You can't treat human beings as bargaining chips and maintain moral authority. Solomon's legacy isn't just one of architectural marvels and proverbial wisdom, it's a cautionary tale about the corrosive nature of absolute power. Here's what makes Solomon's story so disturbing in a modern context. We still romanticize him. We quote his proverbs. We celebrate his wisdom. We marvel at his wealth. But we conveniently forget the 1,000 women whose lives were consumed by his ambition. We don't talk about the Moabite princess who spent her life in a foreign palace, worshiping her gods in secret because her husband only valued her for the peace treaty she represented. We don't talk about the Egyptian daughter of Pharaoh, used as a diplomatic seal on a trade agreement. We don't talk about the concubines, 300 women whose very title denotes their status as sexual property. Solomon's story isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint that echoed through centuries of patriarchal empire building. Kings and emperors across cultures adopted the same strategy. Marry for power, accumulate women as symbols of dominance, and call it statecraft. But let's call it what it really was. Systematic dehumanization. Sexual exploitation dressed up in royal garments. A horrifying abuse of power that we've been too polite to confront directly. King Solomon built an empire, but the foundation was made of flesh and blood, the lives of 1,000 women who had no choice, no voice, and no escape. History remembers him as wise, but wisdom without compassion is just cruelty with a crown. And that's the dark ledger of Solomon's reign. If this video made you rethink what you thought you knew about biblical kings, leave a comment below. What other dark historical figures should we expose next? Subscribe to History's Dark Ledger, because the past isn't always pretty, but it's always worth knowing.